I have buried a lot of animals in my life. You do, out here. The land takes what it wants and it does not send a letter first. But I want to tell you about the one time I was hauling the dead, and one of them wasn't finished being alive yet, and how a man I had spent 2 years thinking was soft turned out to be the hardest, most stubborn creature I ever met on the flat. I keep a little book. My father gave it to me when I was 9 and told me to write down everything that mattered so I'd have proof I'd lived. Most days it's just weather and grain prices and which mare is due. But there's a page in there near the back where the pencil got pressed so hard it went through to the other side. That's the page for this. I've never read it out loud. I don't think my voice would hold. So let me start where it started, with 3 small bodies in the bed of my wagon, and a preacher walking toward me across a burned brown field, not knowing yet that he was about to break my whole idea of what a person could do. The wheat came off the ground in sheets that morning, the kind you can see, the kind that makes the fence lines swim and lie about where it is. I had the 2 grays hitched, and I was driving slow because there was no reason to hurry. Nothing in the wagon needed to get anywhere alive. 3 foals, all of them from the same bad week. I want to be honest about the smell first, because everybody who tells these stories leaves the smell out and it makes them liars. It wasn't rot yet. It was closer than that. It was blood gone tacky and the particular sweetness of a newborn thing, milk and hay and the inside of a mare, all of it turned cold. That smell sat on the back of my throat and would not be swallowed. I had a rag tied over my nose and it did nothing. I counted them again because I count things. It's a habit my wife used to laugh at before she stopped laughing at anything and then stopped being here at all. 1, 2, 3. Little dark shapes under the tarp, legs folded wrong the way legs fold when there's nobody home to fold them right. The first was the black colt out of Juneau. He'd come 3 weeks early and never took a breath that I saw, and Juneau had stood over him for a day and a half screaming in that low way mares do, a sound like a door that won't shut. The second was a filly chestnut out of the old mare Pearl. She'd lived 4 days and then just quit. Wouldn't nurse. Wouldn't stand at the end. I'd sat up with her the last night with a bottle and a lantern and my own stupid hope, and in the morning the hope was the only thing still warm. The third I didn't even have a story for. A bay, small, found dead in the far paddock at dawn with no marks and no reason. Sometimes there's no reason. That's the part nobody puts on the ranch when they dream about owning one. Sometimes the foal is just dead, and the sky doesn't so much as change color to mark it. Boss wanted them off the property before the flies made it a proper problem, and there was a low draw about 2 miles east where we put such things, downwind and downhill from the well. So I was driving them there. That was the whole of my morning. Haul the dead, dig, come back, wash, try not to think about it and fail, and think about it anyway while pretending to think about something else. That's when I saw Pastor Elias Boone coming across the Kessler field. Now I need you to understand something about how I felt about that man, because it matters to the rest of this. I did not like him. I'm not proud of it, but I won't lie to you. He'd come to our county maybe 2 years before, a wide, soft-looking fellow with a voice made for indoor use, and he'd built that little white church at the crossroads mostly with his own hands and a lot of borrowed nails. And I'd sat in the back of it exactly twice. Once when my wife made me, and once at her funeral, which he did for free, which I have never told anybody because it makes my throat do things. But I decided he was soft. That was my word for him. He wept at things. Grown men out here do not weep at things, not where anybody can see, and this man wept at a hymn, at a baptism, at a calf that got its leg caught in a wire once and had to be cut loose. I saw his eyes go wet over a calf. I'd thought, this is a man who has never had to do the hard thing. This is a man who gets to feel his feelings because somebody else does his killing for him. I was wrong about him in a way I've spent years being ashamed of. But that morning I didn't know that yet. That morning I just saw the soft preacher coming and I thought, God, not now. I don't have it in me to be talked to. He raised a hand. I did not raise one back. I clicked to the grays to keep moving. He kept coming anyway. Cut a diagonal across the burned field, boots kicking up little puffs of ash-colored dust from where the grass had gone to nothing in the drought. And by the time I got the wagon to the fence gap, he was standing right in the way of it, hat in his hand, sweat running a clean line down through the dirt on his face. "Morning, Cole," he said. He knew everybody's name. That was another thing about him that annoyed me. You couldn't be anonymous around Elias Boone. "Pastor." I didn't stop the wagon so much as it stopped because he was there and I wasn't going to run him down, though I'll admit I considered it for about half a second. God forgive me. He looked at the wagon bed, at the tarp, at the shapes under it, and something moved across his face, not the wet-eyed thing I expected, something quieter and worse. He looked tired in a way I understood, and I didn't want to understand anything about him. "How many?" he asked. "3, I heard how flat my own voice was. Bad week." He nodded slow. He didn't say anything churchy. I braced for it, for the Lord has a plan or they're in a better place, which is the kind of thing that makes me want to put my fist through a wall because a 4-day-old filly did not have a plan. She had a bottle and a lantern and me, and we all failed her. But he didn't say any of that. He just looked at the shapes and his jaw worked like he was chewing on something. "May I ride with you?" he said, "wherever you're taking them." I stared at him. "It's just the draw, I'm burying them." "I know what the draw is, softer. I'll help you dig." And here's a thing about grief, or exhaustion, or whatever I was carrying that morning. You don't have the strength to argue with kindness even when you don't want it. Especially when you don't want it. I moved over on the bench without a word and he climbed up, heavier than he looked, the whole wagon dipping, and we drove east into that swimming heat with 3 dead foals behind us and neither of us talking. We'd gone maybe a quarter mile when he said, "Stop the wagon." I didn't at first. I thought he wanted to pray or say a word or do some preacher thing, and I wanted it over with. "Cole," his hand came onto my forearm, not grabbing, just there. "Stop the wagon, please." Something in the please did it. I hauled the grays down. He was already turning around on the bench, up on his knees, reaching back over the seat toward the tarp. "There," he said. "There, did you see that?" "See what?" There was the tarp moved. On that one, the end one. "That's the wind," I said. There was no wind. I knew there was no wind the second the words left me, and I felt something cold walk up the back of my neck in all that heat. "That's not the wind." He'd swung a leg over already, easing himself down into the wagon bed with the dead. This soft, careful, heavy man crouching between the folded legs and the stiff necks, and he pulled back the corner of the tarp with 2 fingers like he was uncovering something that might still be sleeping. It was the bay, the one I had no story for, the one found dead at dawn with no marks and no reason. "Pastor," I started, "he's been..." And then the foal's flank moved. I want to be precise about this because I have gone over it 10,000 times. It was not a big thing. It was the smallest thing. It was a shiver that ran along the ribs, a single shallow rise, the kind of movement you'd never see if you weren't looking straight at it in good light, and I hadn't been looking. I'd loaded 3 dead foals and I had not looked. God help me. I had not truly looked at the third one because 2 of them I had watched die with my own eyes and I had assumed the third. Elias Boone had his ear down against that little ribcage before I'd even gotten off the bench. "He's breathing," he said, and his voice cracked right down the center of the word. "Cole, he's breathing. He's alive." I have thought a lot about that moment since, about how close it came to going the other way. If the pastor hadn't cut across the Kessler field, if I'd swung wide of him, if he'd been a beat slower turning around, if the sun had been at a different angle so the shiver of that ribcage fell into shadow. The whole thing balanced on a knife of luck so thin it makes me dizzy, and I'm not even a man who believes the way he believed. But I'll tell you, for about a year after, every time somebody at the church said the word providence, I had to leave the room because I couldn't take a side on it and I couldn't stand not to. Right then, though, there was no time for any of that. Get him out, I said, already moving. Get him, careful, careful of the neck. The two of us lifted him. He weighed almost nothing, which is a terrible thing to feel. A newborn animal that weighs almost nothing, the light frame of him, the ribs you can count. His head lolled. His eyes were half open and filmed and did not track. But when I put my hand flat on his chest, I felt it, the flutter, way too fast and way too faint, a heart working like a bird that flew into a window and can't figure out why the sky went hard. He's cold, Elias said. He's so cold. Cole, why is he cold if it's this hot? Because he's shutting down. I knew this much. I'd seen it. A body that's dying pulls the heat into the middle and lets the edges go, saving what it can. And the fact that this foal was cold on a day like this meant he was a long way down the road and moving fast in the wrong direction. We got maybe minutes, maybe less. Then we don't waste them. He was already shrugging out of his coat, a black wool preacher's coat. The man was wearing wool in that heat, and he wrapped it around the foal without a second's thought, this garment that probably cost him more than he had, and he gathered the whole cold bundle up against his chest and stood there in the wagon holding it like, I'll say it, like the paintings, like the ones in his own church of the shepherd and the lost lamb, except this was real and the lamb was dying and the shepherd was crying and it was not beautiful at all. It was frantic and it stank of blood and there was ash in the pastor's beard. Where, he said, where do we go? You know this land, I don't. Where's the closest? Kessler Place. It was the nearest house with people and a stove and clean water. Old Ada Kessler, whose field we'd been cutting across, whose husband was 3 years dead. Half-mile back. Hold him. Hold him against you. Keep him warm. Do not let his head drop. I got up on that bench and I have never driven a wagon like I drove it then. I'd like to tell you I was calm and capable, the steady rancher. But the truth is my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the lines and I was talking to those grays in a voice I didn't recognize. And the wagon bounced over the hard ruts, and behind me I could hear Elias Boone doing 2 things at once, praying and apologizing. Praying to God and apologizing to the foal. Hold on. Hold on, little one. I've got you. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. We didn't see you. Hold on. That we didn't see you went into me like a splinter and it's still in there. Because I was the one who didn't see him. I loaded 3 foals and I saw 2 dead ones and I let my eyes fill in the third. That's a thing about grief I learned that day and I've never unlearned it. It makes you stop looking. It's easier to assume the worst is finished than to check and find out it isn't and have to fight. Grief is lazy that way and cruel, and I had almost buried a living animal because I was too tired and too sad to lift a tarp. Ada Kessler came out onto her porch when she heard the wagon, one hand shading her eyes, and I watched her go from squinting curiosity to full alarm in about 2 seconds flat as she took in the pastor climbing down from the wagon bed with a bundle in his arms, and his face wet and wild. Ada, I called. We need your stove hot and every blanket you've got, and a bottle if you kept any from the goats. Go, please go. She didn't ask a single question. That's the country for you. The questions come later, the help comes first. She was 70 if she was a day and she moved like a woman half that, disappeared inside, and by the time we got the foal through her door she had the stove door open and wood going in and she was pulling quilts off her own bed with both arms. We made a bed for him on the kitchen floor near the stove. Elias would not put him down easy. He lowered himself all the way to the floor and laid the foal across his own lap and kept the coat around it, and he looked up at me and said, "Tell me what to do. I don't know horses. Tell me what to do and I'll do it." And I realized, kneeling there on Ada Kessler's kitchen floor, that I did know what to do or knew enough to try, and that the soft preacher was looking at me like I was the one holding the answers, and something in me that had been lying down for a long time, since my wife, since before, got up onto its feet. "Warm first," I said. "We warm him from the outside and we get something warm into him from the inside slow or his heart'll quit from the shock of it. Ada, warm water, blood warm, not hot, and honey if you've got it, or sugar or molasses, anything sweet. His blood sugar's gone to nothing. That's half of what's killing him. I've got molasses, Ada said, and was gone into the pantry. Rub him, I told the pastor. Not hard. His legs, his chest. Get the blood moving out to the edges again. Talk to him if you want. Some folks think it helps. I don't know if it does, but it can't hurt. It helps, Elias said, and I understood he didn't mean it helped the foal. I'll tell you about the next 3 hours the way I remember them, which is in pieces, because there wasn't room in me to hold it all in order. I remember Ada Kessler down on her old knees on the floor with a rag and a bowl of molasses water, dribbling it a drop at a time along the foal's gums with the patience of a saint, because he couldn't swallow much, and most of what we gave him ran back out, and we did it anyway, drop by drop, for an hour, and my back screamed and I didn't care. I remember the pastor's hands. Big hands, softer than mine but not soft the way I'd thought. I'd never watched them work before. They rubbed that little colt's legs in long, slow strokes without once stopping, until his shirt was soaked through with sweat from the stove and his arms had to be burning, and every so often his lips moved and no sound came out. I remember the moment the foal's breathing changed. It had been that shallow, ragged flutter, a breath every few seconds, too far apart, and then somewhere in the second hour it deepened. Just a little, a real breath in and out, and then another. And Ada looked up and met my eyes and neither of us said anything because we were both afraid that saying it would take it back. I remember God. I remember when he first lifted his head. He'd been lolling, boneless, the whole time. And then in the third hour, with the warmth soaked into him and a little sugar in his blood, that small bay head came up off the pastor's lap, wobbled, swayed, but up. And his eyes cleared for the first time, and he looked around Ada Kessler's kitchen at 3 exhausted humans staring back at him, and he made a sound. It was a tiny, broken little whicker, the sound a foal makes when it's looking for its mother. And Elias Boone, that big, soft, weeping preacher I'd spent 2 years quietly looking down on, put his face down against that foal's neck and sobbed, not delicate church tears, but the whole-body kind. The kind that shakes a man, the kind I hadn't let myself do since the day he buried my wife for free. And I stood at the back of his little white church with my hat in my hands, and my jaw locked so tight I thought my teeth would crack. I had to go outside. I'll admit that. I went out onto Ada's porch and I stood in the last of the daylight and I put my hand over my own mouth and I came apart for a minute, quiet, where nobody could see, the way we do it out here. When I came back and Ada had made coffee, and the foal was lying up on his chest now, legs tucked, head up, blinking at the fire, alive, alive, alive. And the pastor was sitting back against the cabinet with his eyes closed and tears still running down, and a smile on his face like a man who'd set down something heavy he'd been carrying his whole life. "You did it," I said. My voice came out rough. He opened his eyes. "We did it." Then quieter, looking at me in a way I felt in my chest. "You knew what to do, Cole. All that time I thought you were just hard, and you knew exactly what to do." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the true thing, which is not something I do easily. I almost buried him. My hand was shaking around the coffee cup and I let it. I didn't look. I had 3 dead ones to me and I never lifted the tarp on the third. If you hadn't cut across that field, I couldn't finish it. He was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped. Ada, God bless her, pretended to be very busy with the coffee pot to give us the room. "You want to know why I cut across the field?" he said finally. "Why?" "Because I couldn't stand to be in the church another minute." He wiped his face with the back of his wrist and gave a small wet laugh at himself. "I'd been in there since before dawn. 2 years I've been telling this county that things happen for a reason, that there's a plan, that the Lord's got hold of every sparrow that falls. And I've buried a lot of people's sparrows in 2 years. The Haverson's baby, your Marta, old Tom Reed's boy under the ice last winter. And this morning I couldn't do it anymore. I sat in that empty church and I asked God straight out. I said, 'Give me one. Just once. Let me carry one back. I am so tired of only ever carrying them the other way." He looked down at the foal breathing warm against him. "And then I walked out into the field to cool my head. And there you were with 3 dead ones in a wagon." Neither of us said anything for a while. I'm not going to tell you what that made me believe because I'm still not sure, and I don't trust a story that ties it up too neat. Maybe it was Providence like he'd have it. Maybe it was luck, a foal that wasn't as far gone as the other 2, a shiver of ribs in good light, a soft man who happened to be looking. Maybe those are the same thing and I'm too small to see it. All I know is what happened in that kitchen, and what happened is that the dead came back. One of them, just one, and I got to watch a good man be answered after being ignored 100 times, and I have never been able to look at Elias Boone the same way since. We named him later. We didn't that first night. You don't name a thing that might still slip away. That's an old superstition and I hold to it. But we sat up with him in Ada Kessler's kitchen until the middle of the night, the 3 of us, taking turns dribbling molasses water and keeping the fire fed, and somewhere in the small hours the foal stood up. He stood up. He got those long stupid new legs under him and he wobbled and he crashed back down and he tried again. And on the 4th try he stood, swaying in the middle of that kitchen, and Ada put her hand over her mouth and Elias laughed out loud, a big helpless joyful sound, and I looked at that little bay standing there on legs that had been folded up dead in my wagon that morning, and I felt something come loose in my chest that had been welded shut for 2 years. I don't have a better word for it than loose, like a bolt that had been rusted tight finally turning. There's a lot I still hadn't figured out that night. About the mare he came from who'd rejected him. That was the whole reason he'd been in the far paddock alone, why he was cold and starving. That's what the no marks, no reason really was. A mother that walked away and a foal too weak to follow. And that's a whole other kind of dead the drought was making that year. About what it would cost to raise him by hand, the bottles, the nights, the way the boss would grumble about a colt that owed us nothing but trouble. About the harder thing coming down the road that none of us could see yet, the thing that would test the pastor and me, and that foal in a way that kitchen night couldn't have imagined. But that's the next part of it. That night all I knew was this. I'd driven out at dawn to bury the dead, and I was going to drive home in the dark having watched one of them stand up. And the man I'd called soft in my heart for 2 years had wool sweated through and molasses to the elbow, and a face wrecked from crying, and he was the strongest person I'd ever stood next to. I wrote it all down when I got home, pressing so hard the pencil went through the page. The wagon carried 3 lifeless foals, I wrote, until Elias saw one small movement. And then I sat at my table with the lamp low, and I could not for the life of me figure out how to write down the rest of what I felt. So I left the bottom of the page blank, and it's still blank, and I think that's right. Some things you leave blank on purpose. You trust whoever finds the book to know. We called him Lazarus in the end, though not out loud at first. That was Ada Kessler's doing. About a week in, when the little bay had gotten strong enough to be a nuisance, knocking over the milk pail, chewing the hem of her apron, following her around the kitchen on those long legs like a dog that thought it was a person. She looked down at him one morning and said, dry as a stick, "Well, he came back from the dead and now he won't leave. Might as well be Lazarus." The name stuck the way true names do. Not because anybody decided it, but because it fit, and after that there was no unfitting it. Elias loved it, of course. A preacher gets a horse named Lazarus. That's a sermon that writes itself, and I told him so, and he laughed and said he'd never preach it. It was too on the nose, and I said good, because I'd have had to stop coming, and he laughed harder. We'd gotten to where we could talk like that. That was new. 2 years I'd kept a fence up between me and that man, and one dawn in a wagon had knocked the whole thing flat, and neither of us mentioned it, but both of us knew. I'd been going out to the Kessler place most evenings after work to help with the bottle. Lazarus needed feeding every few hours those first weeks, mare's milk replacer that I mixed by hand and warmed on Ada's stove, and it was more than a 70-year-old woman should carry alone. So I came. And half the time Elias was already there, sleeves rolled, sitting on the kitchen floor with that foal's head in his lap, and the three of us would take our turns and drink Ada's terrible coffee and not talk much, and it was. I'll say it plain. It was the closest thing to a family I'd had since Marta. I didn't let myself think about it in those words at the time because thinking about it would have scared me off it. But that's what it was. Three lonely people and a horse that shouldn't have lived, gathered around a stove in a dying summer. I should tell you about the dying summer, because it's the thing that broke it all open. The drought that year was the worst anybody could remember, and I mean the old-timers, the ones who remember on purpose so they can tell you it used to be worse. Even they went quiet that summer. The creek that fed the low pasture stopped being a creek and became a line of cracked mud with a memory of water in it. The wheat we'd cut came off short and light. And the grass just didn't come. What was there in spring got eaten to the dirt and nothing grew up behind it. And by August, the whole spread was the color of a paper bag, and the cattle were showing their ribs, and the boss's face got tighter every week. His name was Harlan Voss, and he wasn't a cruel man. I want to be fair to him because it's easy not to be, in a story like this, to make him the villain so the rest of us can be clean. He wasn't a villain. He was a man watching a lifetime of work turn to dust in front of him, doing arithmetic every night at his kitchen table that never came out in his favor, deciding which animals he could afford to keep alive through a winter that was going to be lean no matter what, and which he couldn't. That's a thing people who have never run stock don't understand. You can't save all of them in a bad year. The feed's finite. The water's finite. Every mouth you keep alive takes from every other mouth, and there comes a day when a man has to sit down and decide, cold, who eats and who doesn't. It's the hardest math there is, and Harlan Voss did it alone at his table with a pencil, the same way I write in my book, and I think it aged him 10 years that one summer. So when he came to me in late August and told me the bottle full had to go, I understood him. That's the terrible part. I understood every word of it. Cole, he wouldn't quite look at me. He was turning his hat in his hands the way men do when they've got something ugly to say. That bay colt, the one you and the preacher have been nursing. Lazarus, I said. I made him hear the name. I don't know why. Meanness, maybe. His jaw tightened. The bay colt. I can't carry him through the winter. He's not weaned. He's not worth selling. He eats replacer that costs money I don't have, and come January every pound of feed's going to matter. I've got 40 head of cattle and 11 horses that earn their keep, and I'm not sure I can carry all of them. He finally looked at me. I'm sorry. I know you're fond of him, but he goes. This week. Goes? We both knew what goes meant for a foal nobody would buy in a drought year. There's no market for a bottle baby. Goes meant the draw, the same draw I'd been driving toward the morning all this started. It meant I'd finished the errand I'd set out on months before. It meant I'd bury him after all. I want to tell you I stood up to Harlan Voss right there. I didn't. I stood there with my hat in my hand same as him, and I said, "Yes, sir," because he was right and I knew he was right, and there was no argument that money and water would hear. I said yes, sir, and I walked out to the barn, and I stood in the dark with the horses breathing around me, and I put my forehead against a post, and I stayed there a long time. I didn't tell Elias. That was a coward's choice, and I knew it while I was making it. I figured I'd do the thing myself, quiet, spare him the watching, because the man had cried over a caught calf, and I didn't think he could survive burying Lazarus, and I told myself I was protecting him. The truth is I was protecting me. I didn't think I could survive doing it in front of him. I didn't think I could hold my own face together with the pastor watching. So I made a plan to do it alone at dawn before he'd be out. I hated the plan. I hated every piece of it. But I'd buried a lot of animals in my life, like I told you, and I figured I'd bury one more and hate myself and go on, the way you do. Except Ada Kessler got word. Ada Kessler always got word. Small county, and the boss's wife talked, And by the next evening when I came to help with the bottle, Ada was standing on her porch with her arms crossed and a look on her face I'd never seen and never want to see again. "You were going to do it without telling him," she said. "Not a question." I didn't answer. That was answer enough. "Cole Merrick." She came down off the porch. 70 years old, 5 feet of her, and I swear she backed me up a step. "That man asked God for one. You told me the whole story yourself, sitting at my table, crying into my coffee. He asked for one to carry back instead of down, and you were going to take it from him at dawn and not even let him say goodbye. I was trying to spare him." "You were trying to spare yourself, and don't you dare dress it up as mercy." Her voice cracked. She wasn't a woman who cracked. "You go tell him, tonight. You owe him that much and you owe that horse more." I found Elias at the church, of course. Where else? Rebuilding the front steps that had rotted, hammering in the last of the light, and he looked up and saw my face and set the hammer down slow, because he could read me by then. We'd gotten that close. "Who is it?" he said quietly. He thought it was a person. In his line of work, that face means a person. "Nobody, not nobody died." I made myself say it. "It's Lazarus. Harlan can't carry him through the winter. The feed, the water, the drought, he's not worth keeping, and the arithmetic of it, and Harlan's not wrong, Elias, that's the hell of it. He's not wrong, the colt's got to go. This week." I watched it land on him. I watched the whole thing land, the meaning of go, the same as I'd understood it, and his face did something I didn't expect. It didn't crumple. I'd braced for the crumple. Instead it went very still and very old, and he sat down on the half-finished steps like his legs had quit, and he looked out across the crossroads at the brown dead fields for a long, long time. "I keep doing this," he said finally. His voice was strange, flat. "I keep thinking I've been given something, and then it gets taken and I have to stand in front of a room of people and tell them it means something. The Haverson's baby, your Marta, the Reed boy under the ice." He laughed, and it was the worst sound I ever heard him make. "And I ask, Cole, I ask for one back. And I get one. I get one back from the actual dead, out of a wagon, a miracle. I don't use that word lightly, and I'm using it, and now the drought's going to take it anyway, 4 months later, for the price of a winter's feed. What am I supposed to do with that? What's the sermon in that? You tell me. You're the honest one. What does that mean?" And I didn't have anything. I stood there in the dying light, and I had nothing, because there wasn't anything. Because sometimes the foal is just dead and the sky doesn't change color to mark it. And I'd known that my whole life, and he was only learning it now at 45 with a hammer in his hand. But then, and this is the part I have to get right, this is the part the whole thing turns on, he stopped asking what it meant. I watched him stop. I watched him set the question down like he'd set the hammer down, and something else come up in its place, and it wasn't the soft thing. It wasn't the weeping thing. It was iron. "No," he said. "Elias." "No," he stood up. "I'm not going to stand in front of anybody and explain this one. I'm done explaining. Harlan can't carry him, fine. Harlan doesn't have to." He turned to me, and his eyes were dry and hard and absolutely certain, and I understood in that moment how wrong I'd been about soft, how a man can weep at a hymn and still be the hardest thing on the flat when it counts. "I'll carry him. I've got that half-acre behind the church and a lean-to I can fix up in a day. I'll buy the replacer. I'll take the night feeds. If the drought means every mouth takes from every other mouth, then he'll take from mine. I'll eat less. I've got less to lose than a man with 40 head. You can't feed a horse on a preacher's salary in a drought. Then I'll do it badly and we'll both be hungry and thin." He almost smiled. "But I'm not burying this one, Cole. I have buried everything this county has handed me for 2 years, and I have done it with a straight face and a Bible verse. This one I'm keeping. This one's mine. Here's the thing about a whole county, and I didn't know it until that autumn. They see more than you think. It got around. Ada made sure it got around, I'm certain. But it would have anyway. Small places have no secrets, only delays. The preacher was going to hand-raise a bottle full through a drought winter on nothing, because the boss couldn't afford to, and the preacher couldn't stand to bury one more thing. And they came. Not all at once. That's not how it works. It started with the Haversons, the ones who'd lost the baby, the ones Elias had buried a child for, showing up at the church one Saturday with 2 sacks of oats they could not have easily spared and setting them inside the lean-to without a word and leaving. Then old Tom Reed, whose boy went under the ice, drove over with a load of hay in the back of his truck. Hay in a drought year. I don't know what he gave up for it, and I never asked. Then it was the Vandermeers with a bucket of molasses, and the schoolteacher with a jar of coins the kids had collected, and a widow I didn't even know the name of who left a single blanket folded on the fence post with a note that just said for the horse that came back. They came because Elias Boone had carried every one of them the other way. He'd stood at their gravesides and their kitchen tables in the worst hours of their lives, and now here was one he was refusing to carry down, one he was hauling back against the whole weight of the drought, and they wanted God. They wanted so badly for it to work. Not for the horse, for themselves. Because if the preacher could keep one alive against the arithmetic, then maybe the arithmetic wasn't the only thing that was true. Maybe the sky did change color sometimes, if enough people decided it should. I watched a starving county feed a worthless horse through the hardest winter in memory, a handful of oats at a time, and I have never in my life seen anything I understood less or believed in more. Harlan Voss found out, of course. You can't hide a thing like that, and I braced for him to be angry, to feel shown up, a man who'd done the cold, necessary math made to look hard-hearted next to a preacher's grand gesture. He came to find me at the barn, hat in his hands again, and he didn't say what I expected. "That colt eating all right, over at the church?" he asked, gruff. "He's making it, barely. The whole county's chipping in." Harlan nodded slow, looked at his boots, and then, quiet, not looking at me, "There's a bag of replacer in my truck, the good kind. Put it in the church lean-to and don't tell anybody it came from me." He cleared his throat hard. "A man's got to do his math. Doesn't mean he's got to like the answer. Doesn't mean he can't be wrong about which mouth was worth keeping." He drove off before I could say anything. That was the closest Harlan Voss ever came to saying he was sorry, and it was more than enough. And I put the bag in the lean-to, and I never told a soul until right now. Lazarus made it through the winter. I won't pretend it was easy or that it was ever certain. There was a stretch in January, the worst cold, when he got sick, a fever, a rattle in his chest, and Elias sat up with him 3 nights straight in that lean-to with a lantern, and every blanket the county had donated, and I came out and sat with him, and it was the Wagon morning all over again. The 2 of us and a foal that might slip away, and the doing of small, useless-seeming things over and over, because doing them was better than not. And on the 3rd night the fever broke, the way Marta's never did, the way the Haversons' babies never did, and I watched Elias Boone put his forehead down against that horse's neck in the lantern light, and I couldn't tell if he was praying or just breathing. He got his one. The county got its one. In a year that took so much, they held on to one thing on purpose together, and it lived. That was 4 years ago now. Lazarus is a full-grown horse in the church paddock, a good bay with a white sock on one leg and a personality like a spoiled child, because he was raised by a whole community that couldn't tell him no. Elias rides him sometimes, badly. A preacher's never a horseman, and it's the funniest thing in the county to watch. Children come to see him after service. Old Tom Reed brings him an apple every Sunday and stands at the fence a long time with his hand on the horse's neck, not talking. And I don't think it's really about the horse, and everybody has the grace to leave him to it. I still keep my book. There's a lot of pages filled since that summer. Weather and grain, and which mares do. And Ada Kessler passed 2 winters ago, peaceful in her sleep, and Elias buried her. And I stood at the front of the little white church that time, not the back. And I did not lock my jaw, I let it come. And that's her doing too, teaching me that sparing yourself isn't the same as mercy. But I want to tell you about one more thing and then I'll leave it, because I've been circling it and I ought to just say it. A while back I asked Elias if he ever figured out what it meant. The whole thing. The wagon, the shiver of ribs, the county, the winter. Whether he ever landed on the sermon. He thought about it a long time. We were leaning on the paddock fence, and Lazarus was doing something stupid in the far corner, and the sun was going down the color of a peach. I don't think it meant anything, he said finally. Not the way I wanted it to. I don't think God reached down and put breath back in that colt to teach me a lesson. I stopped believing it works like that a while ago. He was quiet. But I saw the movement, Cole. That's the part I can't get past. 3 of them in that wagon, and I looked, and I saw the one that was still alive, and I said, "Stop." And you stopped. He turned to me. Maybe that's all it ever is, not a plan. Just somebody looking hard enough to catch the one small movement, and somebody else willing to stop the wagon when they're told. I've thought about that more than I've thought about almost anything. Because I'm the one who didn't look that morning. I loaded 3 foals and I let grief fill in the third, and I nearly buried a living thing because it was easier than checking. And a soft weeping preacher I looked down on for 2 years is the one who saw, who looked hard enough, who caught the small movement I missed because I was too tired and too sad to lift a tarp. I don't know what that means either, but I know I look now, at everything, at everyone. I lift the tarp now every time, even when I'm sure, especially when I'm sure, because being sure is exactly how you miss it. There's a foal due next month out of Lazarus, if you can believe it. First of his get. Elias is beside himself. Wants me there for the foaling, says I'm the only one he trusts to know what to do, and I've stopped arguing with him about that, about the idea that I know what to do, because maybe I do, maybe that's the thing I carry the way he carries the other. I don't know how that one's going to go. Foalings are their own kind of danger, and this old world doesn't send a letter first. I've told you that. It could go bad. It's gone bad before. But I'll be there, and I'll be looking. I'll be looking so hard.